Welcome back. This is Dan Havey with CF Ninja Hacks, and in this video we're going to take a look at a funnel I was helping Andrea with. She had a client who's going to be doing some sort of a Tango summit. It's Argentine Tango in particular, and they're going to be doing this summit in October here, and so she needed help with this funnel because the consumer, the owner of the site, was asking for a lot of things. Mostly the biggest problem was these huge background images that they wanted to stay centered on the pages, plus some other things as far as rearranging stuff. Plus there's just gobs of text on here, and we're trying to convince the owner to get rid of some of this text, to highlight it, to bring in a copywriter. But that's not what my concern was on the page. My concern was, like this image here, they wanted this to be centered on the page. And what they wanted was that this image would be in the middle of the page and stay centered there as we change the viewport width. So as you went into a smaller device, you would still have that image there. And so that became an issue. And then we had down here at the bottom, I have a video of some movie with Antonio Banderas in it where they're tango dancing. And originally they had this small image over here to the right-hand side. And I thought, well, it'd be cool if we could make it bigger and then also bring it out over proud of the video itself. The actual video, of course, won't have all this other stuff on here because it's going to be coming, I think, from Searchy. But then a few other things that I did not like is, first off, I don't like the swoop down here at the bottom. Never cared for those much at all. But also, once I moved this image over, it had kind of a grayish background, so I put a gradient starting in the corner here and coming out at a 45-degree angle. Also up here at the top, we put in a gradient coming from the top down in order to cover up some of these lights in the background so that it wasn't so white showing through the text. And there is an issue with this image here. You can see the opacity here changes, and so the image needs to be repaired as well. But for the top, this was the original image, and so we had to put a gradient over this top part here, and then we also had a gradient coming up from the corner here in order to make this blacker for the video and the image to sit inside of it. For the second part of this, we had a situation where we also had a background image. And let me show you that background image first. It had all kinds of light and color over here where the text needed to be. And then also in this upper corner, they wanted some text to sit here and basically not move. And the same thing with the image as we went to different viewport sizes. So let's take a look at that text first. So as I size this down, you're going to see the text sizes down as well. So as the viewport height or viewport width gets smaller, the text gets smaller, and so does the image, but they all stay basically in the same place. But what you're also going to see down here on this image, instead of saying centered, what I did is I fixed it to the left-hand side, and so the right-hand side will actually go off the screen as, of course, the text resizes itself over here. And there is a gradient on the left, from the left to the right, in order to cover up the stuff in the back so that we could better see the text in front of it. Now, the next section down here was just a word with this very bright image behind it. So this was the image that is sitting behind it. And where'd we go here? And so what I did here is I took a gradient from the top down and made it very dark at the top, and then it lightens out as it comes down the page, and you can still see all the light streaming behind these images as we get down to the bottom. And the final one we had, this one here has a gradient coming in from the right-hand side, so you're getting kind of the theme of what I got going on here, gradients upon gradients upon gradients. And so we're also got a gradient coming in from the right-hand side across so that it takes out the edge of this image. Otherwise, here you have your image. It's got obviously a square edge around it, but by using a gradient, we can make it look as though the image is actually flowing right into the text. So like I said, here we got a lot of gradients in this one, and my favorite tool for gradients is this one right here. It's called csgradient.io. And the main reason I like this one is that you can natively inside of the tool itself put in opacity along the way, and that's what I did with every single one of these I put in there. It starts off, at the top it'll start off like really dark, and as it goes down at certain points it will become transparent, so you can see everything shining through behind it. You can of course make things linear, or you can make them radial, and of course you can move them around, put in new ones wherever you would like. So it's a great little tool. And here is a site I built using the gradients from that tool. And here obviously we got red to black to perfectly round window right into the middle. And then I have a second one here where it's much more of a halo effect and hazy shadow around the whole thing. So now let's go into the editor. We'll come right in here, and the first thing I'm going to show you is that in the sections where you're going to put in a big image like this, and we're going to fix it to the background in a certain position, what you want to do is make sure you come into your sections, come into that section, and where you put in that background image, of course here I'll show you. So here I put in, where is the background image for this one? This one's right here. So we got in that background image. You want to make sure you set this to no repeat. I've had it on 100% width, 100% width and height, and I didn't realize it, and it took me hours to figure out why I couldn't get it to work. So here's the real key: put it on no repeat. That way there's no settings overriding what you're trying to do on the page. So now let's look at the CSS. And as we do quite often, we're going to make every single section on the page 100% width. So that's that right there. Now on this top section, which I called test section, and you're going to notice that with my data titles is not normally the way I would do it. This has become a real hodgepodge of things getting thrown in together, and so they all have kind of various different data titles. But this top section here with the big background image, I called that test section. And what I realized is I was trying all kinds of different ways to get this image to line up properly. And finally I figured out that, hey, I'm just going to take the height of this image. Let's scroll up to the top here. So let's click on our CSS and let's inspect this section, and here's the section, and inside of it right there is the image, and you hover over it and you can see right up here it says rendered size 2842 pixels. So what I realized I had to do was make this section 2842 pixels high, because what we have here is we have this big blank space in the middle. So the only way you can fill up that space in the middle is by setting the overall height of the page. Then these rows at the top, they will natively stick to the top, but then down here at the bottom where we put in the video and the image and this button, this is a separate row down here at the bottom that we're going to stick to the bottom of this section, so that it'll always be right down here. And of course then you'll have this window in the middle where you can see the people dancing. So that's what I did here, is I set that height to the full 2800 pixels high, and then I said, where do we want to position this? And we want it to stay always right in the center of the page. So now when we try to resize the page, it doesn't decide to move or anything like that. It stays right in the middle, and we pinned it to the top. You really don't need to do the pin to the top part, but put it in the center. And then we say we want this whole section to be position relative, because we're going to position other elements inside of it off of that, and so you got to set that to relative so that the other stuff can be positioned properly. So then this part right here is where the gradient comes in, and we're going to use a pseudo element. So let's go back to our code, and here's the section we're in. So let's open up the section, and right below here you will always have this before pseudo element, and you can use this to put in our case here, we're going to use it to put in this gradient, because what happened is up here in this section, we created the background image of the page. So whether you have a background image or background color, that's already back here. Well, now we got this gradient that we want to put in here, but it has to go over the top of that image because we need the image to stay there. So we take advantage of this pseudo element, which is the next layer up. So we got our background, we got our pseudo element, and then in this case here, you'd have your container inner, and inside your container, you'd have your rows and your columns and your elements as we get closer out basically to the viewers. So think of it that way. So we got our image and we got our gradient behind it. And the first, the first gradient we have is actually the one that starts down here in the bottom right-hand corner. And so what we're saying here is stick this to the bottom, to the right, make it 100% height and 100% width. Did I really need to say bottom and right? The answer is no. I think I could have equally have done top and left, or I could have done absolutely nothing because the defaults are top and left. In fact, let me just turn them off here and see what happens if anything. And I think the answer was absolutely nothing happened, because in this case here we're doing 100% height and width. It's going to take up the entirety of the section no matter what we do, but I'm just going to put those back in there. It just reminds me that that's where this is. It's in the bottom right hand corner, because also in our gradient that again we built with this tool right over here, in that gradient we had, where are we? We had, it's 135 degrees. And so what that says is 135 degrees. In fact, let me just show you over here. So we're going to go linear, and we're going to say it's 135 degrees. So you see we have this angle here, and what technically it's doing then is it's kind of starting in this bottom right-hand corner and going this way. So it's starting over here and going that way. So coming out of the corner and going up, and then here is the actual gradient itself. It's right there and also right here. Now, how do you determine where the gradient is going to be, how dark it should be in certain areas? Well, the first thing you do is you kind of build it out in this tool and figure out, okay, I'm going to need about this and that, and then you put it into your code here, and then you go into the developer tool and you just start messing around with it. Now in this case here, I know I wanted it at a 45-degree angle coming out of the bottom corner, but I didn't know exactly how far out I wanted it to go before the color changed or anything. So it was a matter of just playing around with it. But if we take this up here a little bit and I turn it off now, you're going to see that, let me bring it up a little bit more. You're going to see that it comes up slightly over the image here. So it just gives us a little bit of darkness over this part of the image, but then down in the bottom corner down here, and particularly I wanted it behind this image. That's why I went through all this trouble, was to get it behind this image, just because it looks a lot better when it's black behind it. And so that's why I did all of this. Now in this case here with this image, I would frankly cut the little swoopy off the bottom here. I'm not a huge fan of that, especially trying to build it directly into the image. If you're going to build it, have a square bottomed image and then build the wave as a separate section, a separate image below it, and then if need be you can meld it together with some gradients, as you'll see a little bit later here. So that's what I would do, is I would clean that up. I would also obviously fix this top part where the opacity is not correct on it. So what else do we have in this top section? So next thing we have is what I ended up calling row 2, which is right up here at the top where all this text is. So this top part here, that's its own section, is totally black. But then about right here, a row begins, and so we have it black at the top, 180 degrees, so straight up and down, coming from the top down. And we got black at the top, and then it slowly becomes more and more transparent as you head down towards their heads. And so that's exactly what this is here. Just one more gradient. Then we had to stick the video elements down here to the bottom of the page. And so what we did there again is, so the row got the data title of video row. I said we want to absolutely position this. So we already had our section set to position of relative. So we can then set our row to position of absolute. And we say bottom 125 pixels. So that means we want the bottom of this row to come up 125 pixels from the bottom. And again, that's just purely so that these numbers were not down in the wave at the bottom. And then the last thing we did is that video image. It had been, this is a 3-column row. It had been over here in the right-hand column. And if I were to build this, and again, I'm not the one who built this. I was just helping Andrea after her client actually built this whole thing, and we were the ones trying to have to fix it. And so what I would do is I would have made this all 1-column row instead of a 3-column row, and I would have put this image underneath the video. And then using absolute positioning, I would have pushed it up and over. But it still works just fine to take it in the right-hand column and push it to the left. And so that's what we did here is we said, okay, we want this video, we want this image to be 25% of the viewport width. Now, we haven't talked about viewport width yet, so let me show you how that works. So you see the size of the image right there. But now as we bring this down, you're going to see not only is the video changing size, but so is the image itself. And that's because we told it to stay at 25% of the width of the video, and so is downsizing with everything else. And I think I just said 25% of the width of the video. I meant 25% of the viewport width. So however wide this is that you can see the page, this is going to always stay at 25% of the width of the viewport. So let me see what else we had. We had left of 200 pixels, so that took it from the right-hand column and just pushed it over 200 pixels to the left. And we did a position of relative on this, and the reason why is because we were in a column and we did not have to absolutely position it somewhere. We had to position it relative to where it began, and that meant we just had to move it over to the left 200 pixels, and because we wanted it in front of the video, we give it a Z index of 9, so that will then pull it in front of the video itself. Now, in the next section down, let's take a look at that. So in this section here, like I said, we have text that is positioned up here in the right-hand corner and a image underneath it. And as we change the width here of the viewport, it changes in size. The text size actually changes. So let's take a look at that. Well, in fact, let's just start at the section here. We'll just go in the order that we have it. So again, this is exactly the same as we did at the top. So again, make sure on this section, the background image on this section where we Tango dancers, make sure you set it to no repeat. Or otherwise, you're just going to have all kinds of problems. And so then we're going to set the height again based upon the actual rendered height of the image. We want the entire section to be the height of that image. And in this case here up above, we centered it, or we positioned it in the center. Here we're going to position it to the left so that the entire image will just slide off the screen to the right, and I know I'm always doing this in the wrong direction. And so then we also want this to be position of relative, so the entire section is relative, so that we can absolutely position things inside of the section. And so then again, here we have a gradient, and in this case here, the gradient had to come in again from the left-hand side, come over this way, because we needed to cover up some of this stuff in the background. Basically from here to the left, we needed to cover all this up with black so that we could then be able to see the text. So you see the black overlay comes in here, the gradient comes in here. Again, we set this again as our pseudo element. So it comes in over the top of the red, and I think that turned out looking pretty nice. And then it covered up the lights and the people dancing in the back, and kind of half shadows this girl out. But again, like I said, as we move over to the right, as we get a smaller viewport, if we come down right about here, right about there, that's what you're going to see on an iPad at 1024 pixels. That's what you're going to see right there. But as you get out much bigger, and we can kill this, then you're going to see the entirety of the image. And again, I think it's a good way in this case here to style that image. So that's what we did right there. And let me see. Yeah, that's why we have the left and the top right there. So now Tango headline, what that's referring to is what we have right over here. There are two of them. We have Tango headline 1 and Tango headline 2. I tried to make it as one element, and it just didn't work out. I tried like a carriage return and stuff, but I couldn't fix the line height issue. As the text got smaller, the line height actually got bigger, and that didn't work, so I just broke it into two separate elements. Again, I positioned both of them absolutely, and I gave one a top, the top one a top of 3 viewport width, and the other one of 7.5% of the viewport width. So again, how far they are down from the top is dependent on how wide the screen is. And then as we get down further, and the whole width on them is going to be 40% of the viewport width. And we'll just keep going down here, because here we have then the text itself, the text inside of these two elements, thus the B for bold. We have that text size being 4% of the viewport width. And then I have a little padding on the left side here, which I guess I probably don't really need anymore. At one point I was trying to line these guys up, and then I decided, no, I'm going to make this bigger. The image here, I wanted to make that bigger. And so we did the image down here, same thing, absolute positioning. This time 15% of the viewport width from the top of this section, and gave it a width of 50% of the viewport as well, so it's taking up much more space along the way. And then let me see here, we had one last thing, which is the positioning for the text on the left-hand column. And again, so this whole thing here is just for this text element, it's one big text element on the left-hand side. And again, we're using our absolute positioning, and we're saying we want this down 15% from, or 15% from the top, 15% of the viewport width from the top of the page. And as I'm looking at this now, I'm like going, okay, well, this one's 15% and this one's 15%. How come they're not lined up next to each other? Which, right now, I don't have an answer for that. It could be that this one up here is trying to take up the space for this one, but I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not sure, and I don't have time right now to figure it out. So again, how all this looks in practice is as the viewport gets smaller, the text gets smaller, the amount of distance to the top gets smaller because the viewport width is getting smaller, and everything is dependent upon that. And again, as you see, the image itself sliding off to the side. So now let's take a look at the next section. And in this next section, what we have is, and you notice anytime you like come into the section like this, if you have a pseudo element on that section, so in this case here, we have a gradient coming from the top down, and we have that set again as the before pseudo element. And so what we have here is, I mean, that's why it just disappears, because technically the pseudo elements aren't on the page, which I don't really understand that, seeing it's in the code, but that's a lot smarter people than me. So it's not on the page. So right here we have a whole bunch of rows coming down. And then in the background, again, we have the image. Make sure you set it to no repeat. And then all I did is overlay into the section, just overlaid a gradient. And so it starts off black. So you get a really seamless from this section up here down to this section. Very seamless as far as a flow. And then you have the lights coming out basically below, coming out of the text basically, and then streaming all the way down past all of the dancers that are going to be in this the showcase, or whatever they're calling it, a summit, I guess. So let me see here. Let's look at the CSS. You've already seen it twice. It's exactly the same. That's the nice thing, is once you do these things a couple times, you just copy the code and you do it all over again, because again, we're position relative on the entirety of the section. Then on the pseudo element, we're making that absolute. Top left to 0, height, width, and then you put in your gradient, 180 degrees coming straight down from the top. And then we have one section left. And in this section, we had 2 words here. Actually, it's not 2 words. We have an image, and then we have the word Y. And what we wanted to do on that was to put them side by side and line them up nicely. But as you see here, they are 2 different elements. And if we open up the CSS, we'll come down to the bottom, and you'll see that what we used here was flex, and it's right there. So if we take out the flex, you're going to see these 2 elements are in here, and they're just stacked one on top of the other. So anytime you have elements stacked one on top of the other with flex, they go from here to here side by side, which is exactly what happened. And then we say justify content of center. In this case here, I may not even need this, because there's no other room. Basically, we're taking up the entirety of the space there, but normally you have to justify the content, either the center, the star to the end, do it as space between, space around. There's a lot of different other options. But this one here, align items, we definitely need, because what align items does is it makes sure that it aligns them vertically. So as you see here, as I take it off and put it back on, Tango Secrets, the image moves up and down like that. And then the word Y, we again base that upon the viewport width, because we know that the image is going to resize itself natively inside a ClickFunnels, so we also need to resize the word Y. So again, as if you watch this here, you're going to see the word Y is getting smaller as the image is getting smaller, and so therefore it maintains a size ratio, or whatever you want to call it. And then very last thing again is, again, what you've seen now, I think this is the 5th time, is we're going to put in a gradient on the background. This time is 270 degrees, so that means it's coming in from the right-hand side. And so the gradient is coming in from here, going across, and it's covering up the edge of this of that picture right there. And so as I hover out, you can see the gradient come into place. Now the gradient goes away. And if there was no gradient there, and let's, oops, not that one, come down here, let's pull this over, you could see the edge of the picture. And so I didn't want the edge of the picture showing, and this, I wanted to line up with that. And so everything all together, once we did this, I pulled this over, and therefore the gradient went around onto the image. And they already had in the image itself, there's where the lights, on the image itself, it was already kind of dark on the top corners, top and bottom corners right there. So as I pulled the gradient over the top of it, it makes it looks like it's pretty seamless between the image and the text itself. So I do believe that is it. Again, with this one here, it came from the user. There's way too much text in here. They need to have a copywriter come in and rewrite it. And the other thing is the text definitely needs a lot of styling. At this point here, it's just kind of big clumps of text. And actually, in this section here, I took out at least half of the text, probably 2/3 of the text in here just in order to be able to get it to fit inside of this element properly. And so that is it. So again, as always, if you got any questions, just let me know.